Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. Today, the day of recording, is Monday, June the 8th. And this is a big day here in New York City for so many reasons. First, this is the day that represents the first wave of opening up and easing the restrictions around quarantine. This is a massive day here in New York City. We're expecting about 400,000 people to be going back to work. And just a month ago, we were wondering if we would cripple and topple our healthcare system, if we were going to run out of ventilators. We had a naval ship, I think, sailed up from either Maryland or DC to dock on the West Side Highway because we needed an emergency hospital in the event that we were going to run out of hospital beds. And now today, we're opening back up. Retail stores are opening back up. Construction sites are opening back up. And we got a beautiful day for it. So you can already start to feel some of the energy, some of the healing happening here in the city. And last night was the 11th night of protests in a row here in New York City. And it was peaceful. I believe from everything that I've read across the board, it was a pretty much successful day and night of protesting without rioting, looting, injuries, any incidents or really major run-ins with the police. And Mayor de Blasio just lifted the curfew restrictions that we've been under, having to be at home somewhere between like 7 or 8 p.m. at night. So I'm starting to see some really powerful momentum here in the city. And again, by the time I release this on Wednesday, June the 10th, like everything could have changed. That's just the way the world is today. But I wanted you to hear what it's like right here in New York City today on June the 8th. And some exciting stuff is happening. Also, what's really interesting about June 8th is 1 year ago today, I took my parents out to Long Island for Cory Muscara's 3-day meditation retreat. And like some of the pictures are popping up on social media, reminding me this was a year ago today. Now, the reason why this is so special is because my parents are not meditators. They've never meditated in their lives. To throw them in at the deep end for 3 days, I give them a lot of credit. I'm proud of them. Cory Muscara, if you don't know him, he's one of the country's most popular meditation teachers. He's world renowned, but like here in this country, he's really popular. He's also a dear friend of mine, and he's been a guest on the show a couple of times. And he has this way of making meditation, which is intimidating for people or frustrating for people, and just making it so approachable. So I wanted my parents to experience that, and we had a beautiful 3 days. But the part of the story that I'm most interested in telling you right now is, instead of having my parents bunk up at this like facility that, where most of the meditators were staying, I didn't want them sleeping in uncomfortable beds or dorming with other people. I wanted them to have their own space. So I rented this really nice Airbnb house for them to stay at. And there was like a separate side house that I had a chance to stay at. And this house was owned by the Robinsons, this delightful couple who had the most pristine backyard. Like green grass like you've never seen before. And it was like someone had taken scissors to cut every single blade. Like they take care of their yard themselves. They're probably in their 60s themselves. They have, I don't know what to call this. It's not a beehive, but like they're beekeepers. And they had like, not an apiary because that's for birds, but whatever it was, like they have their own bee farm. And they have like honey that they put in the house for us as guests. And one of the cool things about the Robinsons is that their son, Rashad Robinson, is the president of Color of Change, which is one of the leading activist organizations in the country right now, who's influencing policy around racial inequality, racial justice. And Color of Change formed back in 2011 in response to Hurricane Katrina and the travesty that occurred there and the lack of country awareness, lack of resources, allowing so many people to die in poor and inordinately African-American communities. And so I had a chance to start following Color of Change and Rashad Robinson, who works with all of the biggest leaders of our country for the past year. And his work has been super influential in helping me to talk more intelligently about race. So that was a year ago right now. And I would encourage you to follow Rashad Robinson and actually Color of Change, which I'll link in the show notes on Instagram, because it's a great resource for understanding what's happening now and how to be a part of the change. All right. Today we are talking about 2 more ways to become a mentally tougher man. Now, the reason why I say 2 more ways is because we already released an episode back in September 29th of 2019, called 5 Practices to Become a Mentally Tougher Man. And you guys love that episode. It's still one of our top 20 most downloaded episodes. I think when it released, it was like in our top 5 for quite some time. And we put a one-page PDF together that you can download at doinnerwork.com/resources or doinnerwork.com. Just go to the resources tab. And it has the 5 practices on there that you can use to build yourself into becoming a mentally tougher man. And now when I say mental toughness, right, I really mean both mentally and emotionally tough. But if I put emotions in the title, you guys aren't going to click on the episode. So here I am, Trojan horsing emotions. And if you've been a listener of our show for some time, chances are like you're already on board the emotions train, because Brian and I talk all the time about the need to develop emotional fluency. I think I just said this in like Monday's podcast. Emotional fluency is the ability to feel a feeling, to actually name that feeling, to be with that feeling, even if it's something that we don't like anxiety or fear or rage. Instead of like letting that control us or us suppressing it or ignoring it or distracting from it, to actually like sit with that feeling, to be able to name that feeling and to listen to the wisdom of that feeling. What is it trying to communicate to us on a deeper level? As soon as we start to learn those deeper truths around what our emotions are telling us, then we become mentally tougher, emotionally tougher. We become stronger, more powerful, grounded leaders that make us more trustworthy. As soon as I started building my practice around mental toughness and emotional toughness, that's where I became a leader in my own right. And we want that for you too. Now, it's important to equip you with 2 more ways of becoming a mentally tougher man, because we are operating in a world right now that is filled with anger, filled with hate, filled with rage, filled with arguments, filled with uncertainty. And it's the leaders who have worked on emotional depth, mental depth, becoming mentally tougher and emotionally tougher, who can handle this environment, not just handle it, but be a part of building a better normal, be a part of building a solution. Because there are too many people yelling at each other, trying to wipe one another out. And I'm guilty of that too. There's plenty of opinions that I feel very strongly about right now. And when I hear someone else disagreeing with me about something that I hold true deepest to my core, it's easy for me to want to dismiss them or fly into a rage against them. But that's just contributing, putting gasoline on the fire of our country that's burning right now. And I choose to be someone who's deeper, stronger, and as a part of the solution. So let's talk about 2 more ways that you can become a mentally tougher man. Now, these may be a bit esoteric for you, but if you hang with me, I'm going to make them pretty tangible for you. The first one is holding paradox. Perhaps the best way to describe this is using a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I saw Corey Muscara, of all people, post the other day that I think will really help you understand what we're talking about here. F. Scott Fitzgerald says, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing views in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." All right, check this out. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing views in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So let me give you a few practical examples of how you've probably already experienced holding paradox in your waking life to this point. Now, you've probably heard of the Eastern philosophy of the power of now, being in the present moment. Because after all there ever is right now, now. Like you're only ever in now. You're not in the future or ever in the past. You're only here now. And through a presence practice, mindfulness, awareness of being here and now, there's beauty in this moment, right here, right now. Okay, but what about Western philosophy? Building for tomorrow, for growth. The fact that there is right now, but there's also like a future Dominic who may have a family, who may have needs, who may need to start saving money right now or buying a life insurance policy right now. Like, what about the future? Because it's not just right now, right? Because we have things in the future that I wish I would have taken care of 10 years ago so I could have set the now version of me up better. So you can already start to see that there are these seemingly opposing views, and in many cases opposing views about what kind of presence we bring to an everyday life. I certainly know that when I overweight those YOLO moments, like just it's all about right now, sometimes I sacrifice my future. It could be something as simple as, Well, right now there's a piece of chocolate cake in front of me, or if we're going to use Brian, there's a giant chocolate chip cookie in front of me right now. And if all there is right now, then I'm going to eat this thing right now and feel great about it right now. But there's also how he feels like a few minutes later. There's also how that may show up in his weight a few days later, or for the, like these now and future things can be at odds with each other. I also know what it's like to be overly obsessed with the future, right? Like thinking that all of my greatest days were in the future and constantly striving for an achievement in the future, which brought me disdain for the now because I didn't have those things. So it's quite interesting when we start to recognize this paradox of, what if these two things could be true at the same time? Like all there is now, and at the same time, there's the future that I'm planning for. How do those things marry together? And I think it's the people who don't know how to hold paradox that suffer the most. As soon as I started to recognize that there's like a dance that happens between the two of them, then I could enjoy the present and I could also build for the future. Another tangible example of that is, on this show, we've talked about a number of times for men, one of our deepest cravings is freedom, right? Freedom from responsibility and obligation, freedom to explore the world, freedom to do whatever the hell I want to do right this moment, right now. And yet at the same time, we also have this deep craving for community, for responsibility, for connection. And many of those things come with responsibility, come with obligation, come with being here and following through on your word. Do you not know what it's like to crave both freedom and community? Right? Like a lot of guys certainly want that romantic partner who knows them better than anyone they could build a life with. And also maybe wanting to go out and explore that woman or that guy that caught your eye, right? Like we all have these paradoxes. And when we ignore them, when we fight them, when we say that they're wrong, that's where the real strain comes from. When there's a recognition that a paradox exists, it's like, wow, I really want intimacy and I really want freedom at the same time. If I can look at that closely, I can understand myself much more effectively. It may require a deep level of inquiry, drilling deep and understanding what this seemingly opposing view of intimacy and freedom have, at odds with each other. But when I get to the bottom of it, then I can start to see some real insight as to what makes me tick. That makes me mentally and emotionally stronger. It makes me more capable of hanging in with two seemingly opposing views that are at odds with each other. Whereas I see other guys who don't recognize this and they become miserable in their long-term relationships, or they become miserable in the fact that they're constantly sleeping with too many women or too many men and never able to settle down, never able to find intimacy. It's when they fight the paradox that they suffer. But when you can embrace the paradox, when you can hold the paradox, it's one more way to become a mentally tougher man. Oh, and by the way, holding paradox is going to become an increasingly important super skill as we move into the future, where there's going to be many arguments around race, many arguments about how we come back and build a better normal, many arguments about how the future of our businesses are going to look. There's going to be so many conflicts in our lives. And if we can't hang with those conflicts, if we can't hang with those paradoxes, we will suffer. Either that, or we'll piss off some other people. We'll walk around in anger and rage. We'll end up creating more animosity in our relationships, in our communities, in our businesses, in this world than needs be. So this is a super skill that I would highly encourage all of us, all of you men who are listening right now, to embrace. And the second way to become a mentally tougher man is to embrace our interconnectedness. Now, this is a concept that runs deep through Buddhism, that we all beings are interconnected, that there is no one who is separate, nothing, no living thing, no living being that is separate and apart from the entire ecosystem. One of the ways that interconnectedness is embodied is through the butterfly effect phenomenon. And we just had that happen with a global pandemic that put the world on its ass, breaking out in Wuhan, China, and the rest of the world now is experiencing it. We are now, for the first time in human history, all experiencing the same threat, the same virus, at the same time that we are so interconnected technologically that we're all aware of what's happening in the remotest parts of the world. That has never happened in human history. But I think now we can see so very clearly that what happens, even when we think what we are doing is only relegated to what's happening here, what we have is the potential to impact the entire world. And we've seen that, right, with Wuhan and how the coronavirus has spread throughout the world. That's just one example of an infinite number of examples of what happens locally can spread globally in a moment's notice. In a moment's notice. And the reason why this is so important to understand is because many of us are so caught up in our own problems right now, our own fears, our own insecurities. And I'm not saying that those aren't real, because I don't know what your life situation is. But many of us can't see beyond what's going on in our own worlds right now. And we don't recognize how big our potential impact is on our businesses, on our communities, in our families, in the world around us. And one of the things that I've had people say to me over these last few weeks, especially relating to race-related issues, is, hey, Dominic, this is too big of a problem for me to be a part of, solving. One man cannot change racial oppression, systemic oppression from the last hundreds or thousands of years. And I look at the man who says that to me and I say, if you believe that, then you believe in your own insignificance as a human being. If you truly believe that you as one man cannot make an impact, I'm not saying you need to topple systemic racial oppression, but if you as one man truly believe that you cannot make an impact locally, at the minimum locally, even if it's inside your own family, raising your kids to be less racist than we were, over the course of your life, you can't tell me that you can't make that impact. When I hear you say that it's too big for you, what I'm really hearing is that you don't want the responsibility. But we know that a great man doesn't shirk his responsibility. A great man creates environments where he and those he cares about can thrive. And in order to do that, you need to understand that your impact in this world has a ripple effect, big or small, and sometimes a little bit of both. So let me bring this down to a super practical level, okay? I've been watching the Michael Jordan documentaries, The Last Dance. You've been hearing me talk about this over the last, I think, few episodes. And so I haven't binged the series. I've been doing what's called tantric consumption of television shows, which is a new experience because I typically binge things. So Michael Jordan, one of the most popular people in the world, at any given point in time, maybe like the most recognizable person in the world, won 6 NBA championships, right? And that's the story that we all remember about him, is that no one had ever won that many championships. And he won 3 in a row, retired to go play minor league baseball, came back, won 3 more in a row, went out on top. Like, the guy's just an absolute legend. But if you watch the show, you'll remember that for this first 6 years that Michael Jordan was in the pros, he did not go to an NBA Finals. 6 years. The best basketball player on earth who would routinely do things that no one had ever done before, like win the MVP of the league, win the All-Star Game MVP, win the Slam Dunk Championship, was the Defensive Player of the Year. Like, he won all of these individual awards, and for 6 years, he had no rings, no titles to show for it. Until Phil Jackson, the legendary coach who stepped up, who had never had NBA head coach coaching experience, before taking over the Bulls, and the greatest player, that was undeniably the greatest player in basketball at the time. But Phil Jackson decided to run the team as a champion himself. Like, he played 2 years of championship basketball in the New York Knicks, but he also had a deep spiritual practice. And he relied a lot upon Buddhism, his own Christian faith, and he wanted to bring spirituality to basketball. And one of the things that he recognized on the team was that the players on Michael Jordan's team were just as enchanted by him as some of the defenders were on the other teams, right? And that was a problem because his teammates would just kind of stand around and wait for Michael Jordan to perform a miracle. So when it came time for someone else on the team to step up, they were usually nowhere to be found. If another team did a great job of shutting down Michael Jordan, then the Bulls would lose. And that just became the strategy over time. So Phil Jackson recognized that he needed to get the team less Michael Jordan dependent and become more of a team versus Jordan and the Jordanairs and Jordan and the supporting cast. These were all names for Jordan and his teammates back in the day. So Phil Jackson realized that through his spiritual practice of Buddhism and interconnectedness, and also studying the Lakota tribe, Native American tribes that he grew up around when he was raised in North Dakota, I believe, And he said that the Lakota had deep reverence for everything in its environment, the interconnectedness of all things, including their enemies. Because even their enemies gave them an opportunity to strengthen as a community, to realize how strong they were, to fight for something, to defend something. That brought inner knowing and wisdom. They could see the value of even having an enemy, right? Now, look, I'm not here to talk politics, but I think it's pretty clear that I'm no fan of Donald Trump. And I'm not talking about his politics. I just don't believe the man knows what the fuck he's doing. And yet, it's undeniable that when he finishes his 4 years of presidency here, that he will become one of the most influential and impactful presidents of all time, not because of his own design, but if you look what's happening right now in the racial movement, if you look at what happened 4 years ago in the Me Too movement, I am a firm believer that these things would not have happened with as much force or as much vigor without Donald Trump being the one stoking the flames. I believe that the Me Too movement was a direct reflection of the fact that we could elect a man who talked about grabbing the pussy and getting away with it and ascending to the highest office in the land, where there was so much anger and hostility around that Me Too popped. Harvey Weinstein went down. Louis C.K. went down. Like you're talking about, Jeffrey Epstein went down. Those things I don't believe would have happened with as much vigor or force or intensity or focus if it weren't for Donald Trump, right? Same thing with this racial movement. Like, could you imagine any other president or any other leader fucking this up to the extent that he has? It's galvanized an entire movement where things are changing and forever will not go back. Like, we're going through a one-way door right now in so many ways that we've never been able to go through. If we look at Donald Trump through the interconnectedness of all things, and we can also start to understand that, like, maybe there is a reason why he is the leader of our country right now. And so there's an opportunity to, like, and that's also holding paradox at the same time, right? Like, I don't believe that he should be president. I don't believe in him or what he stands for as a man. And at the same point in time, there are so many benefits that are resulting as a result of his ineptitude. I don't know quite else how to say it. So bringing this back to the Lakota tribe and Phil Jackson, right? The Lakota tribe had reverence for the enemy because they play a part in this world that we are all a part of. And there's an opportunity to grow as a result of that. Phil Jackson recognized that most NBA coaches only involved 7 or 8 of their 12-man roster in any given season. Like 7 or 8 guys would play, the other 4 or 5 guys would ride the pine and would be relegated to kind of like a second class. And he recognized that that's kind of the team that he inherited, with Michael Jordan being the number one guy. There was a whole second-class group of citizens, and then there was guys who never played. And when you were talking about a team sport who want to win at the highest of levels, he recognized that he needed to give men 1 through 12 an essential and vital role on the team, even if it meant playing different times and getting paid differently. Right? Not everyone was going to get paid the same way Michael Jordan was. That's ludicrous. Not everyone's going to play the same amount of time as Michael Jordan. That's also ludicrous. But how to make sure that every man, number 1 through 12, felt like he had a vital role on the team. And that's what Phil Jackson ended up doing. He ended up implementing rotational systems where every guy would get in the game and who had a role, a defined role that he knew that he was great at, that would allow the team to succeed. He even installed an offense, which is called the triangle offense. I don't want to get into too much of the detail in the triangle, but it's basically like Zen in motion. It's basically the ability to be so present and mindful of where your teammates are on the floor, where the defenders are on the floor, and you can fluidly move so that it's almost like you can't defend it. It's almost like what the Navy SEALs have done, where they take and train their SEALs to be able to do this like fluid, interconnected leadership transference. They get dropped into a war zone. One guy who's on the ground, who's leading, then gives way to another guy. And there's like no formal or rigid structure. It's like just totally understanding each other. So when the Bulls learned to do that, Michael Jordan finally got the thing that he wanted so badly, which was to win an NBA championship. He got 6 of them. But if it was left to his own devices, the way that he had seen the world, which was, I'm clearly the greatest player on the planet, and I got to put everything on my shoulders. And if I could drop 5 guys from this team who I don't think are shit, because that's how he thought about some of his teammates, he would have done that. And yet it took a leader with vision who could see the interconnectedness of all things and say, hey, Michael, if you want to win these championships, you're going to have to make some maybe sacrifices on how many shots you take, on your scoring titles, and lift the other players on the team so that everyone has a role, because there's going to be a time where you're going to need to dish the ball and someone's going to have to take that open shot. And as you'll see, Steve Kerr and John Paxson and Tony Kukoc, like all these guys took game-winning shots, whereas it was only Michael Jordan before. And that's where the magic and the dynasty of the Bulls were born. We've never seen something like that since. So to bring this conversation around embracing interconnectedness to a close, I just want to refer back to the episode that we just released on Monday called How to Build Racial Stamina, where Brian was open about the fact that when the protests started to break out and the country started to go into an uproar about the injustice that has taken place, his first instinct was to stay on the sideline and not be actively out and actively anti-racist, because he was just like, hey, I've got my stuff going on over here. There's a lot more people who are doing that thing over there. Until he got to our men's group meeting where one of our brothers, Andrew Pop, who's a black man, broke down in tears and shared with us a lifetime of pain, of anguish, of having been racially discriminated against, that it became real for Brian, that he recognized that this wasn't something that was separate from him, that this was something that he was interconnected by, even if he wasn't aware of it. So sometimes it is more challenging and more difficult to recognize that we are interconnected, because it means a deeper responsibility. It means a heightened awareness. It means taking the focus off of ourselves for a moment and looking at the impact in the world around us. It means asking deeper questions around, how have I contributed to the problem? Where have I been blind? Where have I fallen short? In any area of our lives. I'm not just talking racially, but in any area of our lives. And that means becoming a mentally tougher man. So if you are willing to hold paradox, if you're willing to embrace interconnectedness and look for evidence that supports interconnectedness at all places, at all stops, because you will be able to find it if you look for it. Once you practice these two things much more often, you'll start to notice that you will become a mentally, emotionally more deep man and a mentally tougher man.